Vedanta Society of Northern California on the subject of climate change, a Vedic and Vedantic perspective. And the Swami will elaborate further on the subject, but let's first describe the situation. We're meeting virtually on Zoom and streaming on YouTube, where we'll be having an address followed by questions and answers. The format will be the address by the Swami, and then the questions and answers will both be live on Zoom, and we'll be also scanning the YouTube and Facebook feeds to try to capture virtual questions from the online audience. It's also being recorded for future viewing. We wanted to greet everybody to these unusual circumstances. We're Zooming because of the risks during the COVID pandemic this year, and therefore we can't actually meet in person as we prefer to do. But this is our opportunity to advance our learning and to come together as a community to explore this very important and difficult question. I want to applaud all of you for being undaunted by such the magnitude of the subject, such a difficult one, and yet the intention here is to not get politically agitated, but to actually explore philosophically, psychologically, spiritually, how these subjects can practically help us to further our common interests and personal interests in a practical way. So I've given some thought to the subject by way of introduction to the Swami's address, and I've been asked to spend a minute or two describing that. The society was founded here in 1900, and in that first decade, the building from which Swami Tattwamayananda will be addressing us was erected and first put into service. At that time, it was the beginning of the machine age. Things were not perfect, but certainly slower and might have seemed less manageable to them than previously, but more manageable to us. And I'm certain that the nostalgia that they felt for previous times before they had to face their current difficulties were similar to ours. As a matter of fact, there were probably popular songs at that time that are like our contemporary entertainments that deal with the subject of climate change. There's a very brand new popular movie that uses the symbolism of a comet hurtling towards Earth to satirize our limited response to the climate emergency. It's a Dr. Strangelove type of film. That film was from half a century ago, dealing with the nuclear threat. So it seems that as though during our lifetime, we've had systems of partial understanding and even more partial response. Humankind has faced 5 mass extinction events in its history. Well, not humankind, the planet, the Earth history, has faced 5 mass extinction events and a number of smaller ones, so according to the scientists. Now, how can we face issues like the global climate emergency, global warming, threats to the planet, in ways that are not cynical, in ways that are practical, and that are true to our best nature? The Swami's addresses on Bhagavad Gita and on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras might provide some clues as to some of the subjects that might be touched upon today. The ability that we might have to persist in our better natures, for the perseverance of our spirituality during times that feel like actual or real Holocaust. The gap between what we feel we ought to do and what we end up doing, and the psychology of behavior that goes into that. And also the sense of not shirking our responsibilities as explored in the Gita, in the Bhagavad Gita, the idea that we have a responsibility. Or even from our own American literature, the idea of a connectedness with nature, as in Thoreau's Walden, that we are part of that system of system by which we cannot shirk our responsibility without consequence. So without being too political, I do want to encourage us to come together, form our questions, and enjoy and benefit from the address of Swami Tattwamayananda.
Thank you, Bobby, and welcome everyone. I'm very grateful to Mr. Bobby Coleman for that very appropriate introduction, highlighting the relevance and importance of this very interesting topic. Now, I shall begin with an invocation, which is a normal practice when you expound any subject based on the ancient Vedic literature. In fact, these 2-3 verses which I am going to recite themselves will give an idea of a sense of sanctity and sacredness that the ancient Vedic culture attached to nature, environment, trees, mountains and valleys. So this is the verse. Om Dyav Shanti Rantariksham Shanti Prithvi Shanti Apashanti Roshadhaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shantir Vishwe Deva Shantir Brahma Shanti Sarvam Shanti Shantireva Shanti Sama Shanti Redhi Om Shanti 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 Madhuvata Ritayate Madhuksharanti Sindhavaha Madhvirnasantoshadhihi Madhunakta Mutoshasi Madhumatparthivagam Rajaha Madhudyaurastunapita Madhumano Vanaspatir Madhumagam Astu Suryaha Madhvirgavo Bhavantunaha Kale Vashuduparjanya Prithvi Sasyashalini Deshoyam Kshobhirahido Brahmanastu Nirbhayaha. The translation is very interesting. Let there be peace in heaven, let there be peace on earth, peace in the sky, in the trees, in the mountains and valleys, in waters, earths. Let there be peace in the hearts of everyone. Sweet blow the winds, streams scatter sweetness. May the herbs and trees, oceans and clouds and sky and earth be in a state of pristine purity and sweetness. The dust of the earth is full of sweetness. May heaven itself, the sky, like a father bring us sweetness. Let the ancient forest trees are full of sweetness. May the sun itself shower sweetness on us all. May sweetness flow towards us in all directions. The most important and the underlying philosophy behind the ancient Vedic culture was a sense of sanctity, sacredness and unity, a spiritual unity of existence based on spiritual interconnectedness, spiritual interrelatedness, interdependence of the whole creation. Now, in some of these verses that I quoted just now, you find trees and mountains and valleys, oceans and waters, air and sky and clouds, everything in nature, what we call environment, everything is addressed with a sense of reverence, respect, sanctity and sacredness. I shall try to explain to you the real relevance of this on the basis of, with the help of one important verse from the Vedic literature. In ancient times, during the Vedic times, when a carpenter went to forest to cut trees, I'm going to quote that verse now. that is based on Vedic culture, not from Vedas, but it is from a book that expounds the Vedic way of life. When a carpenter enters the forests to cut a tree, maybe to make furniture, a woodcutter, before he cuts the woods, he pleads, he asks for forgiveness. He's addressing the birds, the insects, the human beings and animals that may take shelter under shadow of that tree. He's asking for forgiveness. And he says, Yaniha bhudani vasantitani balim grihitva vidhivat prayuktam anyatravasam parikalpayami kshamandutan adya namostu tebhyaka. The last part of this verse is, I bow down to you all. Is addressing the birds that may have taken shelter on the top of the tree. And is addressing animals that may take shelter under the tree to protect themselves from extreme sun, heat, or maybe rains, because they depend upon the tree. So, when you destroy a tree, and then he says, he's asking the birds, those who are maybe living in the nests on the top of the branch of the tree, please leave this tree and find shelter in the tree nearby. And now remember, it's not that the woodcutter or the carpenter is praying to these animals or insects or birds. But what it means is, what it implies is, when we cut a tree, we must know that it is done. We must know that we are depriving many of these other creatures of their protection, their environment. So, a sense of sanctity and sacredness. Now, in modern times, we won't be able to do that. But we can borrow from Vedic literature this sense of sanctity and sacredness. When we cut down trees in the forest, we must know that we should not overdo that. We should not go to an extent of spoiling or destroying the environment, deforestation, the flight of birds, then the migrating birds stop flying, the meadows vanish, rain stop coming, droughts follows, floods come. All this happens when we violate this Mother Earth. So Earth itself was considered to be like a sacred mother. That's why in ancient times, when a boy gets up in the morning, this is from Vedic culture, he says, let the earth preserve its same pristine quality. Prithvi sugantha, sagantha means let the earth retain its pristine smell. That's what it means. And sarasascha dhapa means let waters keep flowing. Water should not be blockaded, should not be blocked. Then sparsascha vayu, the characteristic of air is that it touches you, it affects you. Let the pristine characteristic of quality of these elements remain intact in their pristine purity. Jvalidam cha teja means the fire burns. So what happens is, when we violate nature, when we violate the environment, when we destroy the waters around us, the environment around us, we are actually affecting life on this earth. We are violating earth. This should not be done. We should be able to preserve the purity and sanctity of Mother Earth in its pristine, pure nature. Nabasabadyam makhata sakhaiva kurvandu sarve tava suprabhata means the fragrant earth, the waters of the reservoirs, the touch of the wind, the brilliance of fire, and the great voice of sky. Let all of them remain in their pristine purity. This is actually a kind of prayer that you find in the ancient Vedic literature. Now, today we are facing this problem, means this loss of biodiversity, loss of habitat, and pollution of air and water, and in fact, every living organism, from the minute microorganisms to gigantic blue whales, they all play an important role in this important task of keeping the balance of creation intact. So I'm just going to give an idea of some of the ideas of preserving and keeping intact the biodiversity, the purity and sanctity of nature, some of these ideas that are found in the ancient Vedic literature. There are a number of hymns in the Vedic literature. They are called Suktam. Suktam means a hymn. It has many verses. Some of the hymns, like the last Sukta of the Rigveda Samhita, has got 190 verses, and some of them have just a few verses. There are a few hymns, a few of these suktas or hymns in Vedic literature, which are known as Bhu Suktam or Prithvi Suktam. Prithvi means earth. So Prithvi actually means Prathanat Prithvi, something that is vast. Prithvi. Now, in this Prithvi Suktam, you can find many interesting ideas. First of all, to begin with, we shall begin with earth. Then there are a few verses addressed to waters. So how we must look upon earth, air, water, the sky, clouds, how we should treat them with respect, with a sense of sanctity and sacredness. These are the ideas that emerge from these Vedic verses. First of all, the concept of earth, that's very important. There are two words that commonly used in Vedic literature. One is Prithvi, other is Bhumi. Of course, there are many other synonyms for earth, but the most well-known terms that are used in the Vedic hymns are Prithvi and Bhumi. Prathanat Prithvi Ityahu. That is one interpretation. Means Prathana means something that expands. That is Yat Prathade Tat Prithvi, Taittiriya Brahmanam says. Something which is vast, which is expansive in nature, that spreads everywhere. So that is one word used for earth. The other word is Bhumi. Bhavanti Bhudani Yasyam Sa Bhumi. I mean, where the earth is conceived to be the origin of everything. The water, the mountains, the sky, and trees, herbs, everything that helps us to sustain life in this world, that origin, the sustainer, that is called earth. So these are two words used in the Vedic literature. To begin with, I would say a few things about this, the background. In the Rigveda Samhita, there is one short suktam that is very short. That is called Prithvi Suktam. Just a few, 3 verses. But the most elaborate and perhaps the most celebrated hymn, Suktam, is found in the Atharva Veda. It is called Bhu Suktam. It has got 63 verses. So some of these verses are very important. So to give, for example, Satyam Brihat Rudam Diksha Tapo Brahma Yajna Prithvi Dharayanti. Mother Earth. So in this you find mother, the earth is considered to be conceived to the mother. Mata Bhumi Pitroham putroham prithivyaha. So my mother is earth, Mata Bhumi. My mother is earth. Putroham prithivyaha. I am the son of Prithvi. Now, a sage considers himself to be the son of Prithvi as the expansive earth, and also as the son of Bhumi, Bhumi which is the sustainer, the origin of everything in this world. In some of these verses, I shall try to explain. The first one which I am going to explain is from Atharva Veda. Satyam Brihad Drudam Ugram Diksha Tabo Brahma Yajna Prithvim Dharayanti Sano Bhudasya Bhavyasya Patyurum Lokam Prithvi Nakrunodu. This is the first verse of Atharva Veda. It is called Bhu Suktam, a hymn dedicated to earth, conceived to be the origin and the mother of the whole creation. So in this verse you find everything in this world is conceived to be an integral part of one spiritual entity. There cannot be any separation between a living creature and Mother Nature. If you forget your interrelatedness or interconnectedness to Mother Earth, and if you violate the existing rhythm, the existing balance of Mother Earth by cutting trees, by constructing a big dam, blocking the natural flow of a big river, or perhaps by digging Mother Earth in search of valuable minerals or metals, what we are doing is we are violating the existing balance, rhythm. It is called, the Sanskrit word is rhythm, means the natural law of interrelatedness, interconnectedness of the whole creation. So that's why anyone who wants to live in harmony with nature should practice truthfulness, satyam, self-restraint, and also a give and take policy, and again self-control and respect for all living creatures. On the other hand, if we ever try to overexploit nature, if we ever try to upset the existing balance of living beings in this world, we will be violating this inherent rhythm. The word rhythm in Sanskrit and Vedic literature, you find the rhythm. Rhythm implies an invisible thread of harmony and interconnectedness that exists in the whole creation. For example, according to this principle, if you pollute the air, you are, on the one hand, you are violating the purity of Mother Nature. On the other hand, you are also endangering human life. Similarly, when we dig deep into Mother Earth, in search of, digging deeper and deeper in search of valuable gold or bauxite or iron ore or coal, whatever it may be, we are violating Mother Nature. If we cut down trees, destroy forests, if you forget the importance of trees and forest in maintaining the spiritual balance of Mother Nature, we are actually endangering the life of human species. So that's why it is important. Truthfulness, tapa, means self-restraint, self-control, yajnam, a kind of the practice of unselfishness and purity and self-restraint. If we forget these values, we will be violating Mother Nature. That's why in our relationship with Mother Nature, the ancient Vedic sages, they always believed in this fundamental principle. Mata Bhumi Putroham Prithivyaha. Aham Prithivyaha Putra means I am the son of Prithvi. I am the son of this Mother Nature. And I am the son of this Bhumi. Bhumi means this Mother Nature that sustains and supports all living creation. This is the idea behind that you find. Now, these ideas are further elaborated. Their relevance is perhaps this. We have to use science and technology. We cannot go back to the times in which the Vedic sages lived. Many of these verses, they are from maybe 5th millennium BC. That means 7,000 years ago. So we cannot go back to those times. But the underlying principle of interrelatedness of the whole creation, that is the central philosophy of Vedic concept of environmental preservation. In that respect, you find it has got a great relevance to our times. That means we cannot live independent of nature. If we pollute, if we violate nature, we will be endangering our own life. So we should treat nature, look upon nature with a sense of sanctity and sacredness and purity. Sense of sanctity. The trees are sacred, the air is sacred, the waters are sacred. In fact, maybe tomorrow I shall deal with another very important suktam. It's called Apa Suktam. Apo Gishta Mayo Bhuva. You can in the Rigveda Samhita. There's a long description of the purity and our dependence on pure water. It's called Apa Suktam. A hymn dedicated to preservation of purity of water. You find in Rigveda Samhita that we will deal with maybe tomorrow. So, science and technology have made life more comfortable, have brought a revolution in our communication, in our transportation. We are able to live much more comfortably. But at the same time, if we are able to make use of, we are able to retain sanity, then we have to exercise, we have to make use of this wisdom from the Vedic literature. Make use of nature, but at the same time, treat nature with sanctity and sacredness. After this, I shall deal with this well-known sukta in the, it's found in the Rigveda Samhita. So it comes, those of you who are interested, later you can see, it comes in the 5th mandala. So Rigveda Samhita is divided into 10 sections. Each section is called a mandala. Altogether, Rigveda Samhita contains more than 1,000 suktas and more than 10,000 verses. 10,000 verses divided into different suktas, more than 1,000 suktas that you find in Rigveda Samhita. And the whole text is divided into 10 mandalas. In the 5th mandala, there is one important section called Prithvi Suktam. Prithvi Suktam is very, very famous. Badidha Parvadanam Khidram Vibhashi Prithvi Prayabhumim Pravattam Mahita Samati. So you find, Hey Prithvi, the Vedic sage is addressing Mother Earth. Hey Prithvi, Prathanavadi Madhyasthana Devatetvam means the Vedic sage is addressing Mother Earth as the ever-widening, ever-expanding mother. And then the Vedic sage says, Itha Bats He Mahini Pravitvidi, Idam Andariksha Satyam. And the Vedic sage addresses this Prithvi as the absolute truth. Because she is the one who in truth preserves the Vedic culture. And also, that's why, Prithvi is sometimes treated as or Dharitri, means the one who bears everyone, the one who sustains everyone, the one who protects everyone. And this Mother Earth is Utkashravati. You are the one who pleases everyone, you protect everyone, you provide everyone with food, with water, with sustenance, with everything. So there are in the commentaries, of course, some of the Vedic sages mentioned that when you do something, when you do any act of violence against nature, like cutting a tree, you should chant a few Vedic mantras as an act of repentance. So there's a verse here, Paladanam tu vrikshanam chedane japyam vrikshatam gulpna vallida ladanam cha pushpidanam cha virudham. It's very interesting. This is from Manu Smriti. It's called Manu Samhita, which is actually a book which expounds the Vedic way of life. What it says is, when you cut a tree, which is a fruit-bearing tree, Paladanam tu vrikshanam. Vriksha means tree. When you cut down a fruit-bearing tree, then as an act of repentance, Japyam Rikshata means you should recite 100 verses from Rigveda. Gulma Valliladanam cha Pushpidanam cha Virudham. Similarly, when you cut bushes, shrubs, or especially those, these tiny twigs that grow around bigger trees, parasites, then you should recite 100 Vedic mantras. So what it maybe in ancient time this was done as a ritual, but the underlying principle is we should keep Mother Earth pure, and trees and mountains, clouds and air and water, these are the gifts of nature. If you pollute, if you destroy these gifts of nature, then we should recite the Vedic mantras. This was done, perhaps it was recommended as a ritual, but going beyond that, it has got another significance. You should not do any of these things recklessly, because Mother Earth is sacred. And they are coming Stoma Stva Vijarini Pradishto Viktihi Prayavajanne Heshantam Perumasya Sarjini. So means He Vicharini Arjuni, and this Prithvi, the Vedic sages addressing Prithvi, that is, this is Sayana's commentary. Vividham Charanashile Subhravarne Prithvi. You act in so many different ways. Mother Earth manifests in so many different ways. Mother Earth presents before us beautiful flowers, useful, nutritious fruits, fruit-bearing trees, then medical plants. In different ways, the Mother Earth manifests herself as a benevolent, all-loving mother before her children. And then he says, that Mother Earth is Shabdayanda Mashamivodhudam Purigam Megham Prakshipasi. And this Mother Earth also is responsible for projection of her gifts as clouds, because the rivers flow on earth This water flows in the ocean, and from the ocean the water is absorbed by sunlight, and the same water reappears as clouds, and from the clouds water comes again as rains, and again the rivers are filled. Like this, in this cyclic rotation, Mother preserves life on this earth, and that's how we are able to perform activities like agriculture, making food grains, preserving the purity of everything in this world. We are able to live because this Mother Earth provides us with all these, with clouds. And clouds are responsible for rains. Rains are responsible for rivers. Our rivers flow into the ocean. And from the same ocean, water is absorbed by sunlight, becomes clouds, and again come back again. In this way, this cyclic rotation. So, of course, this is a poetic presentation, but the most important underlying principle, as I mentioned again and again, is the inherent spirituality of nature. Nature is not something for us to exploit. The animals and birds are not there for us to kill and eat. The minerals and metals under the earth are not for us to dig deep and exploit and make use of for becoming rich and powerful. Again, the rivers are not there for us to construct a dam across. The river should flow to the ocean. From ocean, water should go to the sky, and from clouds the water should come back again as rains, and the river should get filled again. So there is an inherent interrelatedness in the entire creation. Once you cut down trees, for example, we are actually violating this inherent interconnectedness, interrelatedness. We are upsetting this balance. When we pollute rivers, we are doing the same thing. Because when rivers are polluted, it's because of human greed, because our minds are poisoned by greed. So we want to make use of every gift from nature for fulfilling our own greed. So when we pollute the rivers, the water, or the air, or the mountains, or the clouds, or now even outer space right now, what we are doing, we are actually upsetting the inherent balance of nature. Nature is one integral whole. So you can find nature is treated with kind of reverence and respect. And nature is treated like a mother. That's why, Prithvi, Bhumi, all these terms, most of the synonyms of Mother Earth in Sanskrit are feminine gender. And most of these terms have got another meaning, that is mother. So, for example, Prithvi, sometimes used as a synonym for mother. Bhumi, the origin of the whole creation is a synonym for mother. So this concept of the sacred feminine attributed to Mother Earth, that's an important aspect of Vedic way of looking at nature. This continues actually. So of course this I'm going to discuss some other sutras also later. In the other mantra, there is another important sutra. It is called one mantra in Atharvaveda says, Yatte madhyam prithvi yachanabhyam yasta urjastanvaha sambabhuvu trasu no dehyabhipna pavasvamata bhumi putro aham prithivyaha parjanya pida sauna pipartuhu. O Mother Earth, hey Prithvi, in the middle portion of your body, That means in your heart, please install me in your heart. Then he says, my Mata Bhumi, my mother Bhumi, Bhumi in the sense because the Mother Earth sustains and is the source of origin of the whole creation. In that sense, it is called Bhumi. And then, Putroham Prithivyaha, Parjanyaha. And my father is the clouds. Let them always remain in a state of purity. And let them keep us in a state of purity. So, Bhume Mada Nidehi Ma Bhadraya Supradishtidam Samvidana Diva Kave Sriyam Madhehi Bhutyam. In this particular sutra, it says, this mother, it provides us Lakshmi and Vibhuti. You can find Lakshmi means prosperity. Vibhuti means all kinds of gifts and powers and faculties. So this Mother Earth is the giver of all that we have got. After all, if you look at the evolution of Godhead in Vedic literature, you can find different stages. At the early stages of this evolution of the concept of the divine in the Vedic literature, you can find this Pantheism and Planetesism. So Pantheism equates the phenomenal world to God. Pantheism implies there's a divine inherent spirit within everything in this world. Now, in the Vedic hymns you find at some stage, at the early stage of the evolution of Godhead, external nature is equated with the divine Godhead. But then later on, when at the level of polytheism, a divine hand, a divine destiny is conceived to be behind every natural phenomena. So there is a divine spirit behind the clouds, there's a divine spirit behind the rivers for the Varuna, there's a divine spirit behind air like Marut. So you can find the implication is, of the commentators will make it clear, the implication is everything in nature has a connection with divinity. It doesn't mean that the Vedic sages were worshipping rivers as God or mountains as God, not in that sense. But at the same time, rivers may not be gods and goddesses, mountains may not be gods and goddesses, but you'd admit the fact that everything in nature has a connection with the inherent divinity of life as a whole. If we forget that divine connection, then immediately we may think of everything in nature as tools for fulfilling the needs of demands of our greed. We may look upon entire nature just as it's something that God has given us to exploit and make use of for our own greed. In that respect, you can the Vedic sages have made a great contribution, the inherent divinity behind natural phenomena. Bhume Mada Nidhehi Ma Bhadriya Supradishtidam Samvidana Diva Kave Sriyam Ma Dehi Bhutyam Agnir Bhumyam Oshadishu Agnimabo Vivatyagnishu, etc. The earlier mantras which I recited, the invocation, Dyav Bhumi Randariksham Shanti Prithivi Shanti Roshadaya Shanti. In these mantras, which you can find in the Yajurveda Samhita, let there be peace on earth, waters, sky, mountains, valleys, rivers, herbs, and so on. There will be peace on this earth only if you look upon them with a sense of sanctity and sacredness. In other words, there is an element of spirituality in nature. Nature is something that is to be treated with a sense of sanctity and sacredness. Then there are, of course, we will deal with this subject again. Um, in the Vedic literature, not only earth and air and waters, but other aspects like, for example, fire, clouds, herbs, all these were dealt with a sense of respect. For example, Vayu, air. Vayu represents the natural phenomena of wind. It is described that Vayu was created by Dyava Prithvi. Now, air is treated as an element, as a spiritual part of Mother Earth. We can imagine that if when we pollute air, when air is polluted, it again becomes a problem for the whole humanity. So if you look at the history of humanity, every time when we violated the inherent purity of natural phenomena, nature itself has retaliated by creating innumerable forms of maladies, diseases, different kinds of sickness. I mean, every kind of sickness is a reaction, is a retaliation from nature when we violate the inherent rhythm of nature. That's why in the ancient Indian school of medicine, a perfectly healthy person is defined as it's called prasanna atmendriya manaha sustaita vidiyade. Who is a healthy person? A person whose body, metabolism, mind, and also soul are always in a state of perfect balance, interrelatedness, harmony. Such a person is called a healthy person. Health is nothing but a state of inherent harmony. And we can remain physically and mentally healthy if we can always remember that we are part of nature. We cannot be away from nature. We cannot consider ourselves to be masters of nature. Nature is not something that we can exploit and then live a happy life. We can never live a happy life if we violate the inherent purity of nature. This idea was conceived again and again in innumerable Vedic statements, and the most important one of them is Satyam, Rutam, Dharma. These three important principles which constitute a philosophy of interrelatedness and interconnectedness we can find. For example, Satyam. Satyam is truthfulness. When we are truthful to ourselves and when we are truthful to others. And again, Dharma. Dharma is righteousness, morality or ethics or whatever you may call. So when a person is established in truthfulness and when he is established in moral conduct, then naturally he will be established in Ritam. Ritam is, as I mentioned earlier, Ritam is this harmonizing principle behind natural phenomena. You can find this if you observe nature. If nature is left to itself, if man doesn't violate the fundamental rhythm of nature, if nature can be left to itself, then we can live a happy life. Because there is an inherent interrelatedness, a sequence and a harmonizing principle behind nature. If, for example, seasons, different seasons, and then the sequence of events, you can find the inherent interconnectedness. If we cut down trees, that will cause some climate change. It can bring down the rainfall. When rainfall is gone, there will be droughts, there will be famine, there will be death and misery. The same thing happens when we pollute air. The same thing happens when we exploit other living creatures for our own food. As we already know, of course I'm going to those details, the COVID itself is actually is a natural cause of, is a natural result of our violating the sanctity of other living beings. So when we violate nature, when we violate air, when we violate forest, trees and mountains, and when we violate the lives of other living creatures, nature also retaliates. There will be a consequence. And this retaliation can take different forms. Sometimes it can take different forms of, maybe the form of a war, famine, drought, starvation, sometimes pandemics. All these things happen. So in the Vedic philosophy of life, you can find this emphasis again and again. We should keep our environment in a state of purity and sanctity. And we should look at nature with sanctity. We should deal with nature, we should treat nature with sanctity. We cannot violate nature and then hope to live a happy life in this world. Vedic mantras are innumerable. In fact, the most well-known, the Purusha Suktam, Sahasrasesa Purusha Sahasasha Sahasrapad Sabhumim Vishwadu Avurta Atadishtata Shangulam. You can find this mantra tells you Purusha, the absolute reality is conceived to be an all-pervading, omnipresent divine reality. In the language of metaphor, that absolute reality is conceived to be endowed with 1,000 eyes, 1,000 legs, 1,000 feet, and so on. Of course, these are all metaphor, just using symbolic language. What it means is, this absolute reality is present everywhere, and this absolute reality is present in everything. So, there is one divine principle, and that divine principle is present in everything, including external nature, environment. So climate change or global warming, all these actually happen when we try to disturb the existing equilibrium of nature. If we can allow this equilibrium to remain intact without disturbing it, then we'll be able to live a happy life in this world. Of course, we cannot go back to 70 million BC, we cannot. We are already reached right now a stage as a result of this developments in science and technology. But even in the 21st century, if you can remember this ancient message coming from Vedic literature, the nature is sacred, the air is sacred, the water is sacred, the trees are sacred, the clouds are sacred. Not that they are gods and goddesses, but they should be dealt with a sense of sanctity and sacredness, because they all constitute one integral whole. They cannot be considered to be separate pieces of one reality. They all constitute one integral whole. There is an invisible interconnectedness, interrelatedness behind all this. One single act of violence against nature, it may be cutting trees, it may be an act of deforestation, it may be constructing a gigantic dam across a mighty river, blocking the natural flow of rivers, or it may be, of course, these gas emissions and coal-based industries developing and so on. All these are different forms of violating nature and causing global warming or climate change. I am not going to those details. Perhaps during interaction you can discuss those subjects. What I am trying to emphasize again and again is that repeated message coming from Vedic sages that nature is sacred. So this idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumpakam, the whole creation is one spiritual family. Vasudha means again earth. Vasudha is another synonym for earth actually. Again, Vasu means living beings. Dharayati, bearing, mother of all living beings. That is the real meaning of Vasudha. So, some synonyms of Mother Earth is like patience. That is also sometimes called patience. So, this Mother Earth is so patient. But even the most compassionate mother may have some limit to her patience sometimes, And when that happens, suddenly a big pandemic happens. And then suddenly we are reminded in a very unpleasant way that we are not actually in charge of this world. We have got science and technology, we have got power and knowledge, we have got efficiency, organization skill, but with all that, there is a limit beyond which we cannot go. We cannot stop the tsunami coming and invading lands. We could not stop this pandemic enveloping the whole world. We may be able to control it, we may be able to address the problem, but we could not prevent this from emerging. So that means there is a limit beyond which we cannot go. It's all because we violate nature. Sometimes people talk about we should protect nature. Actually, nature is protecting us. Sometimes we talk about we have to protect nature as if nature is in need of our protection. Actually, we are in need of the protection from nature. Nature should protect us. Nature has been protecting us before the Industrial Revolution. So, the Vedic sages remind us again and again, as I mentioned in my invocation, you can find this here, this Vedic Mantras which I recited just now. This Kale Vashadu Parjanyaha Prithvi Sasyashalini Deshoyam Kshobharahido Brahmanas Nirbhayaka. May the clouds bring rain in time. May the earth be blessed with crops. May the peace of this our land remain undisturbed. May no one be subjected to fear. This one prayer, Kale Vashudu Parjanyaka, etc. Let there be rains on time, and let there be crops on time, and let there be peace everywhere. So, but this is possible only if we allow nature to exist undisturbed. If we don't disturb nature, the nature provides us everything. So that's the idea behind. The moment we disturb nature, then nature also disturbs us. As I mentioned, pandemics can happen, famines, plagues, tsunamis, global warming, all these terrible things will happen. So that's why the Vedic sages are reminding us again and again, the world is one. Vasudha eva kudumbakam. Vasudha means earth, creation. Eka means one. Kudumbakam means family. The whole creation is one spiritual family. That is the underlying principle that the philosophy of life that comes from again and again. This is the great philosophy of life proclaimed by the Vedic sages. Means the whole creation, the whole humanity is one spiritual family. Not only humanity, I should correct here. It's not humanity. Whole creation, trees and ourselves, we are members of the same family. Clouds and air and human beings, they're members of the same family. In fact, the invisible iron ore or coal lying thousands of feet below our earth, they are also part of our own spiritual family. You dig 1,000 feet and bring the coal out. What happens if this continues? Then one day we won't be able to sustain life on this earth. So what it means, even the invisible iron ore or coal lying thousands of feet below the earth is part of our life. We cannot say that God has given those things for us to exploit, to make money and live a comfortable life. We will be able to make money and we'll be able to live, but not a very comfortable life. It will be a very painful life. That's the idea behind. That's why I said nature has to protect us. Nature is not in need of our protection, because we may have power and knowledge and wealth, everything, but we won't have a healthy mind to enjoy the fruits of nature, fruits of science and technology. Science and technology can give us comforts, but we won't have the sanity to enjoy those comforts if we violate nature. That's a great message coming from Vedic literature. Again and again, in the entire Vedic Samhita, more than 1,000 suktas, close to 11,000 verses. In many of these verses you find this underlying principle. Again and again, remember, creation is one family. God has not created these animals, the coal or iron ore or bauxite or gold or trees and mountains for us to exploit, enjoy, sell and make money and live a comfortable life. We are all part of them. We and the iron ore and the coal lying thousands of feet below the ground, we are the same family. Trees and human beings, we are the same family. You try to cut down trees and you find maybe 10 generations later, your children will starve. Today, if we cut down trees, maybe a few generations later, our own next generation, our descendants will starve. So, we cannot detach ourselves from nature. Nature and man, the members of the same family. This idea again and again you find proclaimed in innumerable Vedic verses. I don't have time to go through these elaborate verses, but during interaction you can discuss. You are most welcome. Thank you. Namaskar.
Pranams and thank you very much, Swami Tattwamayananda ji. I have scanned the online question and answer opportunities. I haven't seen any online questions yet. I'll do that again. I'll forward a question of my own, and I'll keep an eye out for hands raised from the Zoom audience, and I will then call on the Zoom audience to propose their questions directly. My question has to do with human behavior. And that is in the title of the address, and we'll be hearing part 2 tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. This was part 1. There have been so many failures and omissions of response on the issue of environmental damage and its consequences. Much of the environmental science talks about catalytic events that accelerate the deterioration of the environment and the potential harsh consequences to life on the planet. I mentioned during the introduction that there were planetary high extinction events which did not end all life. And the scientists say that it actually accelerated evolution to the point that we're at now through the hardships that were experienced. One of the things that was revealed and that gets spoken of in the international climate change conventions and protocols that they treaties that they arrive at is the effect of the oceans. One of the things that happens is that the ocean currents, as they warm, result in loss of oxygen and acidification. So if we know that, and we've known this throughout my entire lifetime, and it became a complete, almost 100% consensus that those prior extinction events were not human-caused, but that perhaps for the first time in history, they could be human-based. So the question is, what do we already know about human behavior that can influence, for positive effect, from the Vedic and Vedantic non-dualistic perspective, what do we already know that we can then marshal for the more appropriate response? For example, outside my window, I noticed last night the street lights burning. So everything that I try to do to minimize my carbon footprint is still influenced by the societal systems that don't respect nature in the way that we've just discussed. So what I'm hoping is that we can explore some of the behavioral things that can collectively help us through our understanding of Vedanta and the Vedantic traditions, how we can then use these interrelatedness of systems so that we can get to a better result, because the way we're going right now is calamitous.
Yeah, in fact, this interrelatedness or interconnectedness, the whole creation is philosophically based on the principle of Advaitic unity of existence. I mean, we cannot build a wall between us and the rest of our neighbor or other fellow human beings, other living beings. In fact, not only living beings, even nature. There cannot be a separation between nature and human beings. So this interrelatedness is philosophically based on the Advaitic concept of spiritual oneness of existence. There is no doubt about it. Now, when we talk about climate change and human behavior, what the Vedas are talking about is that the entire natural phenomena, they're all changing phenomena. Still, they should be treated with respect and they should not be violated. We should not pollute their pristine purity. The emphasis on keeping nature in its own pristine purity, that is echoed again and again in innumerable Vedic verses. So, philosophically speaking, the very idea of unity of creation is an Advaitic concept, in fact. In any non-Advaitic concept, you can see always a separation between us and nature. Trees are there for us to make use of. Animals are there for us to, again, maybe to consume our food or whatever it is. So everything is nature is for us to make use of. But in Advaita you find we cannot do harm to anything in this world without eventually doing harm to ourselves. So there is no otherness in Vedanta, in a non-dualistic system of philosophy. There is no otherness because the reality is one. So that Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam, I mean creation is one spiritual family, is actually an expression of Advaita philosophy at the humanistic level. That's all.
Thank you, Swamiji. I see a hand up, and I also see Rich's question in the chat, which I'll ask after Kathleen. Can you unmute yourself, Kathleen?
Yeah.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Yeah.
My question is that it seems to me in studying and wanting to know more through Vedanta about reality, it occurred to me that we're being spoken to as individuals, and we're learning about our individual responsibility in the whole and the interconnectedness, and how to respond or not respond in the ways of understanding how the manifest world, the earth, helps us to understand reality, Brahman, God, better. And in that way, everything is sanctified. What happens is when I see the calamity of our collective humanity, and what the collective humanity does in certain organizations when people get together to act as one, it seems to me then things are done or not done on huge levels, and that the devastation of our earth is an accumulation of these huge impacts of numbers of people doing these actions. And then I come back down to what is my personal responsibility and karma. And if I see something, say I see an act of a coal mining company excavating the earth for profit and harming the earth and people and itself, that causes a great deal of sorrow, and there's always a desire to try and want to fix that. And in understanding karma deeper, it's like, well, let's look at that wanting to fix it, and what is my responsibility? And Arjuna was instructed through Krishna as an individual. And of course, Arjuna was part of an army, but it was not a sense of, I must do this and everybody else must do what I'm doing. It's our sense of understanding our personal responsibility to reality and unreality as they're combined. So it seems to me, even with your examples with the Vedantic hymns, they're speaking to us on an individual level, and that is that the only true responsibility we have? I mean, is trying to understand our place in who we are and who Brahman is and the divine will. All of those questions come up with this question of the personal responsibility and communal. My understanding is being part of a community and humanity.
In fact, that's true. You know, at the individual level, when we are aware of this problem and when we feel we have to do something about it, and when we look around and when you see these huge corporations working to fulfill their greeds, you know, it's very distressing. You can see it's a very disappointing picture you see outside. At the same time, today, more and more people are becoming aware of this problem. So, surprisingly, many of these ideas that you find in Vedic hymns are echoed by people who have become aware of this problem of climate change and global warming today. Somehow, in our own modern language, when we say that we have to bring down this emission level, we have to, otherwise the polar icebergs will melt and will be floods. So you can find how global warming can create problems, how global warming can cause floods and tsunamis. So when people talk about this, indirectly, they are echoing many of the ideas coming from the Vedas. But what I want to especially emphasize is the idea that nature has to be treated with reverence, with a sense of sanctity. That idea that you find repeated again and again in Vedic literature, with a sense of sanctity and sacredness, that has not been fully recognized in modern times. We have to be careful about polluting air and waters or we have to be careful about deforestation of this industrial emission, So, because it can cause damage, it can cause problems. But that is true, that's a practical level. But the underlying principle that everything in nature should be treated with respect and a sense of sanctity, that's because it's all part of one integral whole. At the spiritual level, that spiritual aspect of this interrelatedness has not been so clearly recognized by many modern environmental enthusiasts. Perhaps they have not reached that stage, but they have become aware of the need to preserve environment. And the recent Glasgow climate change summit and all that are examples. World leaders have become aware of this. The G7 leaders and G20 leaders, they become aware of this. But going beyond all that, in the Vedas you find this ancient message that see for example this prayer which I mentioned, a carpenter or a woodcutter asking permission from the tree before cutting it and pleading the birds that may be living on the top branches of the tree, please migrate to the nearby tree. Well, it is an ancient hymn, but if you go deeper into that compassion for the birds living in that tree, or maybe with animals that may be taking shelter under that tree to save themselves from burning sun in summer, that aspect, the compassion, I mean, that is something very interesting, very touching. That is not being fully recognized. That's important. Even the COVID-19 itself is not unrelated to this problem. In fact, it cannot be detached from the problem we are discussing right now. I mean, the idea that the whole world is for us to kill and eat and enjoy. I mean, that concept, the entire world, whole nature is meant for us to kill and eat and enjoy and make and sell and make money and profit. And then we delude ourselves into thinking that we will be able to live a happy life. But our life is not going to be very happy, as is being proved. So there you can find the relevance of the ancient Vedic wisdom. Don't treat these animals and birds and trees with disrespect. And if you are treating them with disrespect, it's your own peril. That message is coming from the Vedic sages, that sanctity.
Well, that's my question. It's coming at my own peril. I'll give you an example with the tree cutter. About 2 miles from where I live, there's a timber company cutting down trees, and there's a group of people demonstrating for them not to do it. There's a lot of legal questions that are being considered, but as a person who honors the sanctity of all life in that forest, what would my choice be? To sit here and go and do nothing but pray, or go and demonstrate? And I understand that it's not your place to tell me what to do or what not to do, but as far as understanding karma and trying not to cause more suffering in the world, that I can do with my individual choices.
That's certainly that's the right approach. I mean, we should not cause more suffering because of our activities, And again, when more and more people become aware of this problem, like you yourself, if we get the number of people like you, the increasing numbers, those who feel the same way, it would be a great blessing to society, actually. So more and more people are becoming aware of this, imbued with this noble spirit of compassion and understanding and concern for others.
Well, when we were at the gate there and people are shouting obscenities at one another, there's very difficult to experience compassion.
Yeah.
But at any rate, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
I'm going to shift to the online chat where Rich has a question that's very timely. There was a report out of Cambridge University yesterday from some so-called experts saying that these emergencies potentially legitimate authoritarianism politically. Now, as somebody who comes from a family that was trying to keep their spiritual calm, as Kathleen described, during the hardship of the 1940s, that didn't come as a pleasant finding. And neither does it correspond to the following question or to what you had to say about the interrelatedness of us collectively with nature. The question is from Richard. The Vedic approach suggests we stay earnest, stay open, and retain a sacred attitude to the world. How do we accomplish this in the moment? Are there methods for maintaining this attitude through the day?
Yes. Once at least in our own individual life, we can practice this as far as possible. doing our duty with a sense of sanctity and sacredness and detachment and unselfishness. And of course, at the same time, I think this concept of sanctity to what we do, it has got a great deep psychological aspect to it. When whatever we do, when we do with a sense of sanctity, it has a direct positive impact on our mind. Even our everyday life, whatever we do, if we can do with a sense of sanctity and sacredness, it helps us to be in a state of calm serenity. And this Vedic message is mostly about this, the sense of sanctity and sacredness. Attitude to nature and also towards our own activities, including our thoughts and words and ideas. So that's what it actually implies.
Swamiji, it seems to me that Swami Vivekananda, that Swamiji faced some questions about the conditions of modern life during his lifetime.
Yeah.
That basically there was a challenge from the revelations of science, the advance of thinking philosophically, psychologically, spiritually, that he confronted and then referenced certain universal truths that still ring true. You've given a number of addresses referencing that. Is that applicable here to the challenges that we're describing?
What are those differences? The science...
For example, when Swami Vivekananda was called upon to interpret Vedanta for his time, he interpreted it for all time.
Yeah.
But at that time, he was also confronted with everything from Darwin to Marxism and the sort of revolution of thinking about certain world issues.
Yeah.
They were economic,
yeah.
They were physical and scientific.
Yeah.
There was change in the air.
Yeah.
So if we're in a climate emergency, there may be change in the air.
Yeah.
And it may be the fact that governments and the law are behind where we might leapfrog into to get to practical solutions. But when I think about Swami Vivekananda, I think that, okay, well, there's the boldness of vision to deal with the challenges of any time, of that time,
Yeah.
and of perhaps our time.
Yeah. Now, Swamiji used to emphasize again and again that the science has given us a lot of power, lot of knowledge, a lot of new faculties, like developments in science, technology, communication, transportation, and so on. Still, science cannot and will not give us something much more important, that is the ability to make proper use of the gifts of science. Now, science can give us a lot of power, but how to make proper use of that power? Science can give us a lot of comforts, but how to look beyond comforts? That should come from another source, not from physical science Swamiji is talking about. I think that is applicable to this problem of climate change also, because today if you listen to the reports, if you read the reports of the global leaders who assembled in Glasgow and before that Copenhagen, discussing the climate change and global warming, they're all talking about the percentage of this emission and the pollution and things like that. But again, they are not going beyond that. Their solutions are mostly ad hoc, temporary solutions. We so many countries are causing so much of pollution. There's a problem arises. There are counter arguments. The highly industrialized West European and West European nations, Australia, Canada, and United States, they have made the best use of science and technology, including coal-based industries for the last several decades, and they have reached a very high level of progress. Now they are preaching African countries to reduce the coal consumption. And they are 20, 30 years, 40 years behind West European countries and the United States in the industrial production. So how can you preach, how can you preach the African countries after you have yourself been using this coal-based industries for the last 40 years and you have reached such a high level of economic progress? Now you are preaching to sub-Saharan countries, you should not use coal-based. What will they do? They can't afford to have solar energy system. They cannot have alternate energy system. They cannot financially, economically, they cannot afford these high-tech systems or alternate energy system. They cannot. So this problem will always arise. In fact, that's true. This imbalance between different countries in terms of economic and scientific technological progress. So Swamiji says in that area we need what he call wisdom. Going beyond power and knowledge, we need wisdom, and the wisdom cannot come from science and technology. In fact, that's what we find in Vedas. So you find the idea that you should respect nature. See, we are not afraid because nature is going to hit back. These emissions carbon emissions can cause global warming, and there will be tsunamis, there will be floods. So we are afraid. So we have to reduce the emission number. But why not treat the whole? Why not go to the next level? Why can't treat the whole nature with a sense of sanctity and sacredness? Evolve a high philosophy of life based on respecting nature, or treating nature with respect. So that's what Swamiji is talking about, this wisdom. And this wisdom is the ability to manage and make proper use of the gifts of science and technology. That's what Vedas are talking about. It is not enough to be afraid of the retaliation from nature, but you should go beyond that. You should be able to respect nature with a sense of sanctity and sacredness. That thing, otherwise, after some years, another kind of problem will arise. So that's why Vedic sages are telling Vasudhaiva Kutumbaka, means remember, you're all one family. Trees and you are members of the same family. Air and you, members of the same family. Waters and you are members of the same family. The ocean and you are members of the same family. Ocean is not there for you to exploit. A river is there for you to catch fish and eat. The river is a part of the same family as you yourself. So that Vedic wisdom means the unity and oneness, spiritual unity and oneness. Treating different natural phenomena as members of your own spiritual family. I think perhaps mankind will have to evolve a little further to catch the real implication of the Vedic sages. Remember Vasudhaiva Kudumbaka. Remember, literally means earth is one family. Earth means whole creation is one family. If you can remember that, then we won't be preaching to sub-Saharan countries about switching over to solar energy, because they cannot afford to do that. Now that's what is happening. So they are not listening actually. There's a lot of controversies about this, You know that, Bobby Coleman, eh?
Yes. Thank you, Swami, for pointing that out. First of all, it comes in a context of the temporariness of all this, and Advaita Vedanta makes that much clearer to us, and the hymns and prayers, of course, reflect that understanding. And then I'm also thinking that your response does, in a way, answer Kathleen's earlier inquiry about how we connect the individual responses with the collective response. The collective response, if we think about it, some of the expertise that comes from certain authorities is the very expertise that has done so much damage. And then it's like calling an arsonist to put out a fire.
Yeah.
You know, that can't be trusted. But what can be trusted is the more ancient interplay between poetry and spirituality and the transcendent collective heart. I mean, where is the poetry in the equation? Certainly in the prayer and in your perspective as shared with us through the Vedantic teachings. This is where the transcendent framework might inform the science and technology to really help us deal with the situation. So, as somebody trained in the law, I went into law because I thought the trees needed advocates, because at the time, the idea that somebody could advocate for trees was a brand new concept. Otherwise, they were there to be exploited. And then I realized that that system also is, in a way, subsumed beneath the understanding of where we're really at, of what more expansive poetic and spiritual thinking can be, brings to bear on the problem. I see a question up. I see a hand up from Mark. Mark, would you please unmute yourself and ask the question?
Pranam, Maharaj.
Thank you.
And Happy New Year to you. Happy New Year to everyone.
Thank you. Happy New Year, everybody.
I have a question that's, I hope, relevant to our discussion. It's what comes up for me. I'll start out with this morning I took a walk and I saw some rose bushes, a number of rose bushes. And I saw that some of the rose bushes were blooming profusely. And some of the other ones were not producing any flowers at all. And I thought about the tradition that I was raised in, which is Christianity, and how Jesus talked a lot about you can judge people by their fruits, by the fruits of their actions. And he always made a lot of metaphors about trees and vines and things like that. And there's one part in the Gospel of Matthew where he did something which was rather unusual. And I'll read it to you. This is Matthew 19. Now in the morning, as he returned into the city, he hungered. And when he saw a fig tree in the way, he came to it and found nothing on it thereon, but leaves only, and said unto it, Let no fruit grow on thee henceforth forever. And presently the fig tree withered away. And when the disciples saw it, they marveled, saying, How soon the fig tree withered away? And Jesus answered and said unto them, Verily I say unto you, if you have faith and doubt not, ye shall not only do this which is done to the fig tree, but also if ye say unto this mountain, Be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, it shall be done. So, on first thought, what Jesus did seemed rather cruel to the fig tree. He just kind of like cursed it, and it just died. And I thought, well, that's not a very good example for, the talk was, we've been hearing about saving the environment and the blessedness of the environment. But I'd like to get your comment on what Jesus actually did and what he said in this particular verse from Matthew.
I think Jesus was just trying to emphasize the importance of faith. And we should not read more into that. He was just stressing and emphasizing the importance of faith, and that's very important. In spiritual life, or even in this subject that we are discussing in a global warming, climate change, human behavior, faith is something very important. You can find many enthusiasts who have dedicated their whole life for preservation of the environment, forests and ecosystems. Many great men and women have come forward with strong faith. In fact, so I think Jesus was primarily emphasizing the importance of faith in spiritual life. That's very important. Faith is the foundation of spiritual life. Not only spiritual life, any life, faith is very important. So we should not read more meaning into that about a fig tree. That's all. Jesus was demonstrating the importance of faith. That's all.
So it's not so much about what he did to the fig tree, it's more about faith. That was just an example.
Faith, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji. Thank you, Mark, for that question. And Swamiji, there are no more questions and no more hands up, but I do want to thank you for requesting my participation in this. It's a subject that has been very important to me and has motivated me throughout the years. And I'm very much looking forward to the continuation of this great discussion tomorrow. Oh, there is a hand up. There is a hand up. So I don't want to neglect that.
Please,
but I wanted to finish what I was saying just for a moment, Kathleen. We're going to reconvene tomorrow morning at 10. And I'm very much appreciative of how far we've taken the discussion so far. It's been really wonderful, and I thank you for that. Kathleen?
I just wanted to point out there is a question in the chat.
I didn't see it. Oh, there it is. Okay. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you.
I will ask the question. Dear Swamiji, in urbanized living situations, there is a straight disconnect between man and nature, and also disconnect from resources and its origins, especially at grassroots levels, in majority of populations, especially the younger population. I was raised with periodic times like summer spent in farms, with animals, etc. So there is a mutual conception from that exposure and experience with nature. What do you recommend when that exposure is not available to everyone? How can one sow the seeds of these experiences of environmental connection and respect?
No, that's true. In urbanized living, it's very difficult to keep in close contact with nature. But still there are places where you can go and be closer to nature. Mountains, trails. At least when we see those places, we understand the importance of nature. So it is true, when you are living in a very big city, maybe on the 35th floor of a sky-rise building, it's not easy to be close to nature, but still on vacations and whenever you get an opportunity, it's always possible to go to some place, parks or hiking places like mountains for hiking and be close to nature. That is true. Urbanization has done a lot of damage to this, but we cannot, of course, it is an inevitable part of evolution of society. We cannot go back to village life. We cannot go back to this 50 millennium BC. That's a time when these Vedic ideas emerged. We cannot do that. But still, once we keep this in mind, then we understand the importance of living with some connection with nature. It's very important. That's only purpose of it. Yeah.
So in matters small and large, there are things that we can do to expose ourselves, but also collectively there are efforts underway to sunlight the sunken rivers, to reclaim the natural waterways, and all the things that are proposed that may prove necessary for this. There's a great sense of motion on this, but it's comforting that the that the Vedic times already had these issues before them. That's why their hymns emerged. The volcanoes would erupt, the concerns of the changes in the natural world prompted them to develop and compose and perpetuate the very hymns that you shared with us. There's a hand up from Mark. Mark, would you please ask your question? You're muted. Please unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to be bold and ask two questions today. And when I first heard about this talk, I was in the middle of reading a book by Ramana Maharishi. It's called Words of Grace. And he makes a statement which says, those who have realized the self by direct and immediate experience clearly perceive beyond all doubt that the phenomenal world as an objective, independent reality is wholly non-existent. So I know that, not all of us have realized the self, but my question is, if this phenomenal world, and I'm not going to say not real, but but he says non-existent. I think I need to have my understanding cleared up, because I'm thinking, well, if the world doesn't exist, why should we care about the environment? Why should we care about our lives? Why should we care about, basically anything if it doesn't really exist? We don't experience it that way, but what he's saying is those people that have reached that state, for them, it's non-existent. So if you could clear that up, I would appreciate it.
Okay, right. Thank you. So, Ramana Maharshi, when he talks about the phenomenal world to be non-existent, what he's talking about from the highest absolute point of view, this phenomenal world of names and forms, all these, they are not eternal. And they are not real with the capital letter R. In Vedanta, there are three levels of reality. And Ramana Maharshi was a close follower of Shankaracharya. In fact, all his teachings are based on Shankaracharya's teachings. So according to Shankaracharya, there are three levels of reality. The absolute reality is beyond time, space and causation, and beyond any change, no change. That is the highest reality. Below that, there is the relative reality, this world, everything that we see, the phenomenal world. What we are talking about, mountain, valleys, air, water, and so on. They are not absolutely unreal because we experience them, but they are not absolutely real because they don't remain the same all the time. In Vedanta, in Vedantic hermeneutics, something can be called absolutely real only if it remains unchanging in the past, present and future. If it is always the same, then only it can be called absolutely real in Vedantic perspective. And Brahman is the only reality which is absolutely real because it is changeless. It is beyond time, space and causation. The natural phenomena which belong to, which is within the jurisdiction of time, space and causation, they are real only in the relative sense. They are not real in the absolute sense. But they are not unreal in the relative sense. They are real in the relative sense. They are unreal in the absolute sense. So, the changing phenomena are not absolutely unreal, but not absolutely real. So when Ramana Maharshi said it is wholly unreal means not absolutely unreal. These are two levels of reality, Paramarthika and Vyavaharika, the absolute and the relative. The third level of reality, which is absolutely unreal, and that is something which cannot be even intellectually conceived of. For example, the horns of a hare Hare cannot have horns. So something which when you mention, it's obvious it doesn't exist. Like that. So remember, it cannot even be intellectually conceived of. That is absolutely unreal. So the absolute reality, the relative reality, and the absolute unreality. These are three levels of reality in Vedanta. So when Ramana Maharshi said that this world is not absolutely real, what he meant was it is only changing reality. At the same time, Ramana Maharshi also stressed the importance of practicing spiritual disciplines. So where do we practice spiritual disciplines? Living this phenomenal world. We are part of this phenomenal world. This body is part of the phenomenal world. Everything is part of the phenomenal world. So we can transcend the phenomenal world only by living in this phenomenal world. So, and for that we have to keep all these in a state of perfect purity. And surprisingly you find, if you observe the lives of great spiritual teachers like Ramana Maharshi or anybody like that, you find they had a sense of sanctity even in their everyday activities, even in their everyday interaction with the external world. They had a sense of sanctity and sacredness. And this not only in the traditional Vedanta, even you look at Jesus Christ or Buddha. In their activity there is a deliberation, there is a kind of deliberate sanctity, a sacredness that they attach to everything they did and spoke and taught. So you can find, and that attitude they maintain even in their interaction with nature. A spiritual person will not deliberately pollute air and water, no. A spiritual person will not do anything that damages the pristine purity of nature. The entire Vedas, you can find Gita, Upanishad, anything you find. The very phenomenal world, which is not absolutely real according to Vedanta, is extolled as Mother Earth. Remember, because it is this Mother Earth that gives you food. This is your biological mother gives you food when you are a baby. It is this Earth, Mother Earth, that gives the whole creation everything that it needs. Food, water, everything. You get the clothes you are wearing is cotton coming from earth. Food comes from earth. Water comes from earth. There is nothing that you have which is not a gift of the earth. Indirectly, the gift of the environment is part of earth, of course. So this is a very important thing to remember. A spiritual person, one important characteristic of a spiritual person will be that is a sense of sanctity even in his dealings or in her dealings with this phenomenal world, which is, from the Vedantic perspective, not absolutely real. It doesn't dismiss it, doesn't treat with disrespect or neglect or indifference. That sense of sanctity is characteristic of all spiritual persons. Sri Ramakrishna, if you look at Sri Ramakrishna's life, Holy Mother's life, you find when little bits of acts did with a sense of sanctity and sacredness. For all the time preaching the God is only reality. So let us destroy the earth on which we are living, because earth is unreal in the absolute sense. No spiritual person ever did that. So even when you are dealing with this earth, which is from a Vedantic perspective not absolutely real, its sense of sanctity and sacredness is the essential characteristic of a spiritual person. Positive, constructive, creative. This sense of sanctity and sacredness is a natural quality that comes to any person who thinks of something transcendental, something higher, something eternal. That's the idea. Thank you. Thank you for the question.
I think there may be another question, but I don't see a hand up. So I'll just say that the hand is up. Okay. Let me just, before I get to that, I just wanted to, because it's a follow-up on what Mark asked, to just very quickly, you've often taught Swamiji that that there's more than just an ethical out in the sky, that we ought to do this, that it's aspirational. You've often said that that ethics, in a sense, can be mandatory because of just the reality that we harm ourselves when there's harm to the externalities. If we harm others, we're really harming ourselves because of the connectedness. So you've often spoken about that. I think that is in a way a very practical view, and you've just given in a way that answer, that we live in that practical reality on this level. So there is a question, and you're unmuted, so please ask that.
I actually am making more of a statement than making a question, but should add up to being a question. The thing I see that even spiritual people don't have access to is a great overview of the order of a world that is evolving to perfection. And not having that view, I lapse all the time into alarm that things are going amiss. But in fact, everything is obedient to those laws which are changing this world. And I need to be steady. I need to be in my duty. I need to be in my practice and keep that. That's the only thing I have to offer this world, which is between a ratio of being and not being. That's all I have to offer.
Thank you for that statement. Thank you so much. Thank you. Very appropriate statement. Thank you.
Very appropriate and eloquent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Swamiji, I can't thank you enough. I don't see any more questions, but I am thrilled actually at the combination of inspiration and practicality that we've received today. I'm very delighted by that and looking forward to part 2 tomorrow. I want to thank everyone as well for participating today and for viewing in the future. Thank you for watching. And we welcome you back tomorrow morning. Thank you so much for joining us on a challenging but thrilling and important subject. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Bobby. So much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. So we'll conclude. Thank you. So tomorrow we'll meet again at 10 a.m. in the morning. Tomorrow. Thank you. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.